Good evening and welcome to episode 49 of the Jacksonian. As I'm yours truly, Jackson Johnson, and I have with me is the beat writer for the Georgia Bulldogs at DawgsHQ at On3, the one and only himself, Palmer Thombs. As we go over our take on what's going on with the Bulldogs, what was it like going up against Kentucky last week, how the season's going so far, and we give a little bit of what we believe what's going to happen on the Alabama-Georgia Bulldogs matchup next Saturday and what needs to be worked on in the bye week. And let me tell you something, folks, it's going to be a wild ride. How you doing today, good buddy?
I'm doing well. Appreciate you having me on. Yeah, it's certainly going to be a fun one next Saturday. When Georgia and Alabama meet up, and always tends to be a good one. It's going to be a little bit different, not seeing Nick Saban on that Crimson Tide sideline, but there have been some battles between these two teams before Saban. There will be battles between these two teams after, and even in the new look SEC, I think the SEC titles and championships in this league are going to run through Georgia and Alabama.
Oh, man, it's always fun discussing the history of Alabama, Georgia, because, there's so much history before Coach Saban and Kirby Smart went against one another, and during that, and after that, and way before that, like especially 1965. Like, that's a fun one right there.
Yeah, that's a little bit before my time, but obviously the recent battles, in that Kirby Smart, Nick Saban era, have been absolute clashes, and it's cool watching Kirby as he, having covered him for a few seasons now, as he has grown into more and more like Nick Saban. Obviously, he comes from that tree, and having spent so much time with Coach Saban, both, spent a couple of years with him at LSU, spent some time with him with the Dolphins, but obviously the extended time that they spent together there in Tuscaloosa, the influences of Saban certainly are there for Smart. And, it's been interesting to see how he's, both taken on a lot of what Saban does, but also, put his own spin on some things.
Oh, man, it's going to be fun discussing what it's like seeing Kirby Smart at Georgia for sure. And, for those who don't know about you, would you like to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, Palmer Thombs over at DawgsHQ. We've got a really good group of writers and reporters covering Georgia, both the team and recruiting side of things. And so, I would encourage you, if you're looking for any sort of Georgia coverage ahead of this big game, come check us out. That's DawgsHQ, DawgsHQ. Myself, Jake Rowe, Rusty Mansell, Jeremy Johnson, and Jake Roos. We've got you covered on all fronts. And, not just this week, but every week. It's always an exciting time in Athens.
It most certainly is. And, you just talked about like the journey of Kirby Smart. And I know one way where he's kind of like Coach Saban, the revenge games. Because like Coach Saban, anytime his teams needed revenge, with the exception of 2011 LSU and a few others, like 2015 Ole Miss, Alabama always got revenge a year later.
Yeah.
Could that be the same thing with the Georgia Bulldogs this year?
It's going to be interesting. Obviously, there's a lot that has changed since that SEC championship game that we saw last year. That went in the way of the Crimson Tide. And I think that, but there's a lot that's the same. You've still got a lot of similar faces, familiar faces on both sides here. Jalen Milroe, obviously it starts with the quarterbacks. Jalen Milroe and Carson Beck are both back, and that's going to be a big battle. I think that there's a chance that both those guys make it to New York as Heisman Trophy finalists. They've got a lot of respect for each other. Familiar faces that surround those guys with the weapons. Obviously, a lot of new there in Tuscaloosa as well. So it is interesting to see. But again, anytime you've got Alabama and Georgia going at it, it's going to be an interesting one, whether they played last year or not. I think that there's a lot that Georgia's going to try to take away from that game. But I think that they also understand that this is a new Alabama team. This is a new Alabama system. It's a new everything there in Tuscaloosa with Saban no longer there, but it's also a new look Georgia team. No Brock Bowers, no Ladd McConkey. You lose 9 guys to the NFL this past year. And so you've got so much turnover. You bring in double-digit guys out of the transfer portal. Not all of those are making impacts, but you've got some freshmen that are making impacts, some youngsters that are making impacts, guys that are stepping into bigger spots, than they held last year when these two teams met in December. And obviously, another big difference is that this game's going to be played at Bryant-Denny Stadium. It's not in Mercedes-Benz. It's not in Sanford. It's not in the Peach State. It is at Alabama. And that is a big, big hurdle that Georgia has to overcome. That they went there in 2020, and that was a very weird environment. I was at that game, and what a weird year that was overall. A special Alabama team, but and a solid Georgia team. It wasn't their best group, but to play Alabama, that Alabama team, to play Florida. And that really good Florida team that regular season dropped 2 games that year. And so we didn't see what feels like it's almost an every year occurrence in the SEC championship game is we didn't see those 2 teams. We saw them in the regular season instead. And that's the last time that we saw these 2 teams play in a regular season game. And so that's another difference is that there's not a trophy being handed out at the end of this one. You may pick up some, votes for a number 1 ranking. These 2 teams are coming in at 2 and 4. It looks like it'll be, at least according to the AP poll. And, but there's a lot that is on the line here. Different in a 12-team playoff era, different when there's not an SEC championship trophy being handed out, different without Nick Saban. But again, still a lot of familiar feelings when Georgia and Alabama meet.
Well, and I noticed that Kirby Smart, where it was like when he first showed up, Georgia was known as that team that always blew it in the big game. And they always fell apart, in that one game they shouldn't have, right? And, and after the bowl victory against Cincinnati on New Year's Day of 2021, there were a lot of people questioning, if not now, when? Now Kirby's got 2 natties. I wouldn't be surprised if we see 3 national titles in 4 years in Athens. And I will say, I'll go as far as say Kirby Smart has done a way better job than like Vince Dooley and Wally Butts combined. Like
it certainly is a special start that Kirby's done. And, it's especially crazy considering the fact that he's just 49. And this is his first head coaching gig too. I think when you consider all of those things, everything that Kirby has done already is a legendary career in and of itself. But you also have to remember that there's so much that still can be accomplished. Do I think he coaches as long as Saban did? Probably not. In this world of transfer portal and NIL and, constantly having to recruit your own roster. I don't know that there's going to be a desire to coach as long as Saban did into his 70s, but I don't see Kirby Smart going anywhere anytime soon, at least in the foreseeable future. And so as long as he's got, recruiting the way that he does, I mean, since 2017, Georgia's finished no lower than number 3 in the country. They've had a trio of top ranked classes. With as long as he continues to bring in that talent, they're going to continue to be really good. And a 12-team playoff, certainly puts them in a position where they have a really good shot to be in the mix at the end. And you get into that 12-team playoff, and it's going to be interesting to see. Is it a new sense of life for every team that's in? And are we going to see some underdogs, riding their hot hand? Or are we going to see the talented teams, the big dogs that are the most talented groups out there? Are we going to see those teams rise to the top and whether they're an 8 seed or a 5 seed or a 1 seed or whatever it may be? Are we going to see the Georgias and the Alabamas and the, Texases and Ohio States and Michigans and those teams, Oregon, throw them in with Dan Lanning? Are the rich going to get richer in this 12-team playoff era? All that's to say, I think Georgia's got as good of a shot to win a national title this year as anybody. I think that, again, that 12-team playoff makes it so that you can afford a loss. Not that Georgia wants to lose this game, but it's not the end of the world if they do lose this game, like it maybe would have been in a 14 playoff era. But they've also got rough road tests against Texas, Ole Miss. Tennessee comes to Athens. And so right there, that is, add in Alabama. That's 4 of the top, 6 teams in the country. Throw in Ohio State. And, they are playing 4 of the other 5 top 6 teams in the country. And that is a really, really daunting task, especially when you consider that 3 of those are on the road. So Georgia's got as good of a shot to win it as anybody. Alabama is in that mix as well. But I think that, it's certainly interesting to see them playing these big time games and seeing Kirby Smart coaching on that sideline.
Well, and I noticed that Georgia Tech is on Black Friday this year, but luckily it's not the first time in this rivalry's history that's not been on a Saturday. It's been on Thanksgiving and or Black Friday playing times, which, I mean, I know some people have just like poo-pooed it, but me personally, I like it for one reason. Well, couple reasons. One, it's a little something different. It feels kind of like Alabama and Auburn on Black Friday in 2009 and 2010. Number 2, do you really think you're going to win ratings by having Arkansas, Missouri on ABC at 2:30? No. So what are you going to do? You're going to have Georgia Tech on, or, Ole Miss, Mississippi State on. You're not winning anybody over with Arkansas, Missouri. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but that's not a huge rivalry, unfortunately.
Well, and I don't know that Georgia Tech is a huge rivalry either, but I think when you move it from that Saturday to the Friday, it makes for, like you said, something different. It gets a few more eyes on it than would have been had they been playing at noon on that Saturday when Ohio State, Michigan is playing. When you've got Alabama, Auburn, that same day. When you've got
Texas A&M.
Texas A&M. You add that one back into the mix. Georgia Tech it's a really good rivalry, and I think it's important to the people in the Peach State. It's not an important rivalry nationally more often than not. Now, if Tech, returns to relevancy, then maybe that's the case. It certainly looked like they were trending in the right direction with the win over Florida State, but what is Florida State? Not that great, probably. And Tech loses to Syracuse, falls out of the top 25. But, again, I think that last year's game was a fun one. It was different. They didn't play at noon. They played at 7:30 under the lights at Bobby Dodd Stadium there in Atlanta. And that made for an interesting one. And I think, playing it on Black Friday this year will make for an interesting one as well.
Well, and I hope, and I don't want to call it early, but I hope they do it again for 2025, honestly. Because, I hate that nobody really seems to pay attention to that. And I've heard like some people say, well, Georgia should get rid of that Georgia Tech. No, don't do that. Don't do that. That's bad for the state.
I don't agree with the people that want to get rid of it. I think that there is a place for Georgia Tech and a traditional rivalry in a, ever-changing sport of college football. There's absolutely still a place for it. And, you can play 12 games and you can play your, let's just say the SEC goes to 9 conference games and there's only 3 non-conference games now. There's still a spot for Georgia Tech. You can go out and you can play your Clemson. You can go out and play a Florida State or an Ohio State or whatever marquee matchup you want, but there's still room for Georgia Tech. And so, I think sometimes people, it would be interesting if that game ever, and I don't think it will, considering, its place in the sport and the importance of rivalries in the sport, but it'd be interesting if that game ever moved up into September, if people had a different feeling about it. Hey, it's a non-conference game against a power conference opponent. It's something different as opposed to playing the cupcakes. I think part of the reason why people look down on Georgia Tech is because it's on rivalry weekend and because it's a non-conference matchup.
And obviously, some of those people don't spend all their time looking at the history of college football like we
Right.
do, but maybe we can like make it fun for them. So,
Yeah, last year's game was fun to watch, and I think this year's has potential to be fun. And again, putting it under the lights, putting it on Black Friday, it makes for a fun one.
well, and I remember when I talked with Alex Dono a few weeks back from Locked On Canes that I've got a feeling that Georgia Tech under Brent Key will get a win against Georgia. Like not this year, of course, but at some point in the future. Because I mean, if you're keeping it close with Georgia in your first full year, I won't be surprised if we see it be kind of like Alabama, Tennessee, where like everybody poo-pooed the Alabama Tennessee rivalry until 2022. Same thing with Oregon, Washington. People poo-pooed Oregon, Washington. Washington ends that losing streak 2016. And when that day comes where we see Georgia Tech ending that losing streak against Georgia, then people would be like, okay, maybe I took it for granted.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Absolutely. If something were to change in the series where Georgia actually felt a threat that they might lose a game, there's certainly a difference there. So, no, you're spot on with that.
And speaking of the state of Georgia, I found out yesterday from the Georgia governor, Brian Kemp, where he made a law where student athletes' rights to earn cash will be protected. What'd you think about when you heard that story yesterday?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's certainly a change in, we're talking about the changes in college football, and this is a change in college athletics across the entire landscape. Is that student athletes, have their rights, and they deserve to have those rights, and they can get paid, and now with pending NCAA litigation and court cases and all that, there's the chances that nationally it can happen, directly from the schools to the student athletes. Now we're talking about state legislation coming in to protect the schools in the Peach State, in the state of Georgia, that they can do it now. I read up on it a little bit. ESPN, sources told them that Georgia and Georgia Tech and the big power hitters in the state of Georgia are not planning on paying their, starting it immediately and paying student athletes directly immediately, but having this this executive order come through from Brian Kemp means that should something happen where other schools are starting to do it, Georgia and Georgia Tech are not playing from behind. And, that's something that's, we go back to talking about Kirby Smart and similarities to Nick Saban. Kirby wants to be prepared for that, whatever could potentially be out there. And this is one of those things. And he wants to make sure that if there's a way for him to get an advantage, he's going to have that. And he's certainly not putting himself at a disadvantage. And so I think that this was probably something that, came indirectly or directly through, the football coaches, and add Brent Key into that mix as well. He's a guy that has, Saban ties and, understands the importance of recruiting, and NIL is a big part of that now. So, it's certainly interesting. I don't think it changes anything about this season, and I don't know that it changes anything about the way that Georgia is going to go about its recruiting. They're going to continue the same approach of we're going to recruit guys that fit our culture. But Kirby and Georgia certainly didn't want to be at a disadvantage. And now they've got their position to be in a spot where they are always going to be competitive on an NIL front.
Oh yeah, it's going to be great for the universities, and it's going to help them quite a lot. And we talked a little bit about the season a little while ago. They put on a huge spanking against Clemson, but last week they almost fell to Kentucky for the first time since 2009 and the first time at Lexington since 2006. Now, luckily, it's been quite a long time that Kentucky's beaten Georgia back to back. And the last time that happened was the last year of the Bear Bryant era at Kentucky. and it was at the third year of the Blanton Collier era in Lexington, Kentucky. Blanton Collier, and for some people that are watching this, he was the last coach to lead the Cleveland Browns to an NFL title. That year was 1964, and that we didn't have Super Bowl era until 1966. Of course, we had AFL and NFL.
It's been a long time. It's safe to say it's been a long time on a lot of these fronts. And I think Georgia was lucky to get out of Lexington without a loss. And I think that you look across the Kirby Smart era, especially in the more recent years, it's not often that you're saying that they're lucky to avoid a loss. A lot of times they mess around and put themselves in a position where maybe they're not in the best spot and they don't play their best game, but they do just enough to get by and win. And they did that. They did that this Saturday, but it did have a little bit different of a feeling because of the way that Georgia struggled. I don't want to read too much into it because I think that you look at Georgia's track record and over the last few years, they've had a few of these games, last year at Auburn, last year at home against South Carolina at home, 2022 at Auburn, or excuse me, at Missouri.
And they looked a little sloppy against Kent State in 2022.
Yeah. I mean, Georgia has had games, especially early in seasons and especially on the road, where they have not looked crisp. I think that it's a situation where Kirby, learns a lot about his team and learns what buttons he needs to push to win these games. And, I think that you're much happier coming out of that game and learning from, an ugly day with a win in your pocket than you are with a loss. And so, whatever way that needed to happen, Georgia is 3-0 instead of 2-1. And, I think that there's a lot of areas for improvement. The bye week comes at the right time for that. And I think that it all starts with Carson Beck. It starts with the offense getting going. And, you look at Saturday's game and they put up a record low from the Kirby Smart era, a total yardage in the first half, their first quarter total yardage. And I know it's hard to compare first quarter stats because you may not get the ball first and all of that. But, their first quarter total yardage was the lowest of, since 2019. And so certainly was not pretty, but they found a way to win. And, I think Carson Beck needs to improve. I think the offensive line has some adjustments that need to be made. They're going to have to adjust with no Tate Ratledge for the next month or so after he underwent surgery to repair a sprained ankle, also dealing with sprained MCL. So they're going to look different. The wide receivers need to improve their perimeter blocking. Defensively, tackling needs to improve. It's really hard to critique a defense that hasn't given up a touchdown through 3 games, and they did a good job, but they could have done a better job. Could have gotten off the field earlier. So you want to fix third downs. You want to fix that knockback tackling instead of it being, giving up the 2, 3, 4 yards that can come from falling forward. They want to be the ones pushing back. And so there's certainly room for improvement. But like I said, you'd much rather be working on that improvement without a loss in that column.
Yeah, and I noticed that Carson Beck's stats so far are 680 passing yards, 7 touchdowns, but he's got 0 interceptions. Thank goodness for that. Because I always hate it when people go, oh, this guy's had this many interceptions. You're not supposed to be bragging about interceptions. That is not something you brag about.
Yeah, that has been Georgia's saving grace, especially offensively, and especially Saturday. Narrowly avoided an interception there. Had a pick 6 that got called back because of an incompletion. But Georgia has not turned the ball over. And I think that, if Kirby Smart was watching this, he'd want me to knock on wood as I say that. But Georgia has not turned the ball over. If you don't turn the ball over and you don't give away possessions and you give a group that's as talented as those opportunities to execute, more often than not, they will. and they found a way to execute just enough to get a couple of field goals on the board, and then finally punch one into the end zone there early in the fourth quarter. And they moved the chains enough to keep the game in their favor and not give Kentucky too much time. And again, it was not pretty. It was one of the uglier Georgia football games that I've watched. But I think that Georgia fans should not feel too concerned about it. I think that there's a lot of things that you can circle and point to and say, hey, that's easily fixable. That's something that, just an off game, this, that, the other. I think that this team, they should get healthier during the bye week. That starts in the defensive line where they were missing 3 key contributors there. You get those guys back and you're not having to play 3 guys 50-plus snaps. Maybe the defense gets off the field earlier. Maybe the offense gets a couple more drives. Maybe they get going a little bit quicker. Maybe we're talking about an entirely different game. And so Georgia wins 13-12. What, like I said, wasn't pretty, but the Bulldogs get out of there 3-0.
Oh, yeah. Because, it's September, not November. Because if it's November, then it's time to panic. September, don't panic. I always hate it when people panic. But I will say, though, I got a big laugh out of knock on wood because, my mom was always saying that, knock on wood. Oh, that's not wood. I'll figure out what's wood around here later.
Yeah, no, we've seen Kirby speak at the podium and physically knock on the podium. So, like I said, if he were watching this, he'd want me to knock on some wood as I say that.
I think he just might. I think he'd probably get a kick out of this show. Just be like, who are these guys? I want to get their names. But it's going to be fun looking at Alabama, Georgia, and it'll be interesting to see what goes on. And, it's fun looking back at the history. There's again, 1965, where Georgia had that lateral, beat the defending champion Crimson Tide. 1962, Joe Namath's debut in all of college football. And 1945, where Harry Gilmer and Charlie Trippi went against one another in a 28-14 Alabama victory. And, there's many more games that I could go on this list, but SpongeBob never ever come in here and go 30 years later. So
yeah.
So it's fun watching this game, and and I know Kirby's only had one win against Alabama so far, with it being the 2022 national title, but that's the win that counts right there, the national title.
Yeah, and obviously he's 1-1 in those situations. Would have liked to win that first one, especially being that it was in Atlanta and early on in his career. I think he's turned out just fine. That national title win in that season, the way that whole game played out was it was a special one there. A special one for Georgia fans, a special team, and I think the further removed that we get away from that team, the more that Georgia fans can look back and say, man, that was a incredible group. And the fact that, we had all of them at one time is just unbelievable. There have been really good players that have come through Athens since then. They've won a title since then. There have been, and it hasn't been that long, but I think that, again, the further removed that we get away from that, the more that you can just look at that team and say, I don't know that there's going to be another one like that. And for that team to beat that team, that was on the other side that Monday in Indianapolis, and to the defensive effort that it was that entire season, the defensive effort that was that game to, keep Bryce Young, Heisman Trophy winner, in check. I think that was a really special, and you talk about the revenge game earlier. They got revenge that night. From an ugly SEC championship performance that left a lot of Georgia fans, wondering, man, we thought this team was the one. We thought this was the year. I guess if this isn't the year, when will be the year? To get that revenge certainly was special. And so he's not complaining about, being 1-1 in national championship games. But, I think that he would have liked to have a couple more wins over Alabama. That's for sure.
Oh yeah. Well, I had Georgia winning it all in the 2021s. Like, even though I'm a Bama fan, I predicted Georgia would lose the SEC title to Texas A&M, but then win the national championship against Texas A&M. I felt like A&M was going to upset Alabama and then like take advantage of the opportunity from there.
Well, and they did upset Bama that year.
Yep.
They got them that year at Kyle Field.
But I was wrong about them winning the West. So I was dead wrong there. It's like, one of these days I'll have to show my past predictions. I've gotten plenty of them right and some of them wrong.
Yeah, that tends to be the way that those predictions go.
But it's Georgia. Like, when that game-winning touchdown happened in the 2018 national title, like Eli Gold got excited, Chris Fowler, and Sean McDonald brought out the puberty voice for that game on ESPN radio. Now we just got to see if Sean McDonald will bring out that puberty voice for a Georgia national title where he goes, "Car touchdown, Bulldogs."
He's called a couple of the games so far this season for Georgia. He called that Clemson one, called that Kentucky one. Maybe Georgia fans,
he didn't go call.
He doesn't call the games, and they can get a little bit going on offensively before. But no, again, certainly excited about Georgia Alabama here in a couple of weeks.
We just got to get him calling Georgia Auburn, and that's during my birth week. So it's like, I just want to hear him go, "Come on!" Like, yeah, that's a voice I've been working on quite a lot over the years. Yeah, so it's like sometimes I do voice impersonations, and who knows, maybe I can get a little good doing that. So, in the meantime, we end this episode on a pretty good note. And any final thoughts? And where can people find you, man?
Yeah, like I said, come check us out over at DawgsHQ, DawgsHQ. You can find me on Twitter, Palmer Thombs, PalmerThombs. Just excited to see, yet another should be really good game between Georgia and Alabama. You never know for certain that how these things are going to play out. But more often than not, they've played out in really fun fashion, for football fans that they get to tune in to the Bulldogs and Crimson Tide doing battle. And so excited to come to Tuscaloosa, excited to see these two teams. And, I think that we will know a lot more about both of these teams and the college football landscape in general and the SEC landscape. I think that the SEC landscape and the college football landscape are pretty tied together there with the amount of talent this league has. And I think we'll know a lot more about it next Saturday.
Oh, yeah, we most certainly will. And DawgsHQ on X is one follower away from that magic number, 9,000. Let's get it to 9,000, everybody. And, of course, you can find me on X, Instagram, and Threads on Jackson VOCFB on X, and on Jackson Johnson 543908 on Instagram and Threads, where I run my mouth and give updates here and there everywhere. And you can find me on YouTube on Jackson Johnson 979, where I'm 130 subs away from that magic number, 500. I'd love to get there soon, and I can't do it without your help, everybody. And, of course, you can also find me on Alabama at the Voice of College Football Monday afternoons at 5 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, where I host Crimson Tide Live with my good buddy Johnny Burtz as we bring the latest news and notes on the Alabama Crimson Tide, and it is 88 subs away from the magic number 2,500. And, of course, you can find the latest episode, the bye week, where we go over the impact of Ryan Williams, the takeaway of Alabama-Wisconsin, Tua Tagovailoa's injury, and where we go from there for Tua. The Alabama-West Virginia home and home series possibly being canceled in favor of the backyard brawl, and much, much more. And on that note, we wish you all a happy Wednesday night, and to stay safe, stay cool, stay away from the heat. Wish you all a very good night, and we'll be seeing you soon. Take care, everybody.